Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about premarital counseling, relationships,
building. How do we, in premarital, we're going to use that term that includes cohabitation, forming of any type of long-term relationship. We see it in terms of premarital because we're binding, like having a legally binding contract.
Yeah.
And so being prepared before we enter that particular contract is really important, but know that it does go beyond just marriage.
And some of the things, and we've covered this in various episodes, and so we're going to be more specific with the notion that somebody's getting ready to commit to this person for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And some of the things that we feel are really, really important to talk about and process and think about. Because in our line of work, we see couples later down the road where if this had been talked about, it might not have been some of the things that bring them in, such as
we might not have gotten married. We might have solved it ahead of time.
Yeah. Or the choice of having children, or the choice of how to parent, the parenting styles and
faith, conflict, you name it, right? We see this all the time in our practice of, well, I didn't know you didn't want kids. I didn't know that X, Y, and Z. And then it really turns their relationship or marriage upside down.
Even to this day, I'm still shocked when I hear that.
Oh, it kills me.
Oh, so did you know that about your partner? What would be an example would be, I didn't know that they didn't want to have kids. And it's like, you've been together 10 years now. Did you ever talk about this?
No, it never came up. Why did it not come up? It's really hard as a couples therapist to not say, like, I wish we could go back 9 of those years and have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. The tough thing is the balance between choosing to stay with somebody because you care about them and you have feelings for them, and whether that doing so aligns with your values. Maybe you have a value of having a child and they don't. It doesn't fit in their values. For you, it's everything you've wanted growing up because of what it represented for the family and the culture. And for them, it doesn't, but you don't want to let them go. It's very tough. And this is why earlier on, these discussions need to happen.
Before there's this cemented bonding.
And even before the discussions, there might need to be an exploration of values. Like, what do you value? What do you want this to look like? If you really had to think about it the best you can, we can't predict the future. Like, how do you want to parent? How do you want your partner to parent? What are values you have in parenting in terms of type of school you want them to go to, or things you want to do before bedtime? Do you want a routine where we have to read to them every night? Where some families, they don't read at all to their children.
Baptism, right? Do you believe in infant baptism? Do you have a faith you ascribe to?
Yeah.
I had a couple too that in the United States, with the election year coming up, I had a couple and they've been together, say 2 years. I didn't know he was Republican. I don't support those values. And for the other partner, she was the opposite. And that's jarring, but they've already bonded for 2 years. So the idea of, well, can I leave my relationship over this? If we had asked these questions in the beginning, we don't have to be in those tough spots of, but I really love you. And you go against some of my deepest core beliefs or values.
Yeah. And a lot of people are like, well, we have time invested, so we don't want to end it. And it's like, well, okay, you don't have to end this just because there are differences, but how are these going to play out long-term? And a good indication is how they played out so far. And are they what brings you in here? And if so, then this might be a big deal for us to consider whether this is even worth continuing. And I think about it as like, that sounds very scary. And the difference that people experience when they're living their life in accordance with their values is so drastic in terms of happiness and like less stress than not.
And in conceding, right? If I say, okay, I'm fine with compromising and finding a space between us, can I do that without resentment? If I feel like, well, I guess I just got to deal with it, that shit bubbles.
Oh, you mean I can't punish them the rest of the relationship and remind them all the time of like,
go away.
I sacrificed everything for you.
Yes. Or like parenting is a big one.
Yeah.
Where I'll have a couple and one partner will say, oh, well, I only wanted 2. And the other one will say, but I wanted 4. And then as the marriage goes on, it's, well, this is why I wanted another one. We'll see, we should have had another one. And it happens where we're in our 50s and 60s of, man, I wish we had more kids. And those little comments just breed resentment.
Yeah. And negative sentiment towards one another.
Yes.
Yeah. Other things that we talk about in the context of premarital is expectations around sex.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? And, people are like, oh, it's fine. Earlier on, it's like, it doesn't matter because sex is probably thriving earlier on, the honeymoon phase.
Unless we're abstinent.
But we still need to talk about what that looks like, because it's not going to be that consistent long-term if it is happening. And like, who's to initiate it? How much are you expecting per week? And does your partner know that you expect that much? Because that breeds a lot of resentment when that's not met. Because for some people, their self-worth is tied up very much in that physical action.
Openness to kink or different sexual acts. That can be a sticking point. Monogamy versus non-monogamy. I have clients where they've been married a hot minute in a monogamous relationship, and then they discover actually non-monogamy is what my partner wanted. And I had no idea because they didn't tell me.
Yeah.
And now they have to reconcile that in their marriage.
Yeah. And that's tough because you've already spent this time invested. We've gotten close. We've allowed the bonding to happen.
And we have this base expectation of what our relationship should look like. And then it gets rocked.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Discipline in terms of kids.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you don't have kids yet, start talking about how do you imagine discipline going in your home? Of course, it can change. And it typically does. Once we have kids, our idea of what we thought we would do can get challenged a little bit. But does your partner believe in corporal punishment? Do you? Are you guys diametrically opposed in those categories?
Look at your family in that. How were you disciplined? Because typically on an unconscious level, that might actually carry on unless you're very intentional and conscientious of not continuing how you're disciplined.
Or kind of doing that pendulum swing to the other side.
The opposite. Yeah. Oh, what do you mean? I shouldn't respond to every little thing that they want, so they become a little narcissist.
That is a real world challenge, Gray.
Yeah. The world revolves around me because every time something happened, my parents responded to me. Oh my goodness.
But that's a big place it shows up. Talking about this early on, it gives us a chance where, you know what, I wanted kids and my partner doesn't. Maybe I don't want to marry them. To make that decision before the covenant is met, right? Yes, you can get divorced. And that comes with its own financial ramifications, social stigmas. If you are of faith, what does that look like for you? It comes with a whole nother set of challenges. So if we can decide that before we move in with a partner, before we really invest in the bonding and covenant, all the better.
And this isn't to say that, oh, there's a difference, we need to end it. There's actually some important things to consider when we're looking at these differences. Are they based in value or are they based in emotion? I think about, I've worked with several couples about the decision to have children. And one thing that comes up, I don't know, I haven't really seen any trends, whether it's male or female in the heterosexual couples. But one of the partners has this thought that everything is like black and white, going to change, never going to have any time to myself, things are going to suck. And it's very, very much emotional based, this fear.
Sure. And
then one will have the value of like, this is what I've imagined for myself and wanting to experience this stuff through having a child of my own. Or if we can't compromise on that, then fostering or something. But this idea of like, how do I know that my decision to or to not have kids is value-based versus emotions? And if it is emotions, we can work with that a little bit of how can we make this decision while removing some of the emotional aspect, if you will.
And if it is value-based, look at the tension point. So kids, is there a compromise to be had? With kids, it's one of those where there isn't. You can compromise on numbers, but you can't compromise on, are we having one or not? You can't partially have a child.
Right.
So that's one where you really need to talk about it before marriage, because if your partner says no, and you really want them, there's no compromise.
You can't have partially child. Right.
But if it's something like political values or faith, there are ways to compromise on that.
Yeah. Other things, finances.
Ooh.
And it's just, one is, what is your financial model? What was that growing up? What do you foresee the responsibility? Does one person take it on, or do we have conversations about it? Do we set
Do
up
you save? Do you spend?
Yeah. Do you impulsively buy like me? Like retail therapy is a value of mine.
Philanthropy. You know, you could give to your podcast partner if you really feel like impulsively buying. But how do we navigate that?
Those are very important. That's one that I would say comes up a lot with the couples I work, is they really haven't talked about finances. And I typically ask, so what are your guys' beliefs on spending or saving? And they look at each other, well, they handle all the finances. And if that works for you, fine. But just having that expectation of what that might look like moving forward, instead of investing because we emotionally are attracted to somebody. And if you've had sex, obviously your bonding chemicals are highly, activated. And so making sure that we're looking at what is this going to look like in a practical way. It's not going to be this honeymoon phase forever. So what does a day-to-day going to look like with this person?
I have my clients who are not in relationship or freshly dating write out all of their non-negotiables. That is so much harder to do once you're in relationship with someone, especially in love with someone. But if you can write out your non-negotiables, the things that, not about them being tall or cute, because that shit fades anyway, but the things that I have to have in my partner.
Yeah.
Do they actually hit those non-negotiables? Which ones don't they? And is there room for compromise? When we're in that infatuation stage, we're often like, oh, it's no big deal. We'll figure that out later. No, don't wait to figure it out later, team.
Yeah. Later means, well, we both bought a couch together. We have a dog together. And now there's all these reasons to stay together in something that clearly is probably not the healthiest.
Yeah. I just think of the dog thing, like the recent, I don't know, trend of dog custody. Have you seen this?
Yes.
You're gonna have to go through dog custody, which is insane, by the way.
It's a thing though. They're fur babies.
Oh Lord.
So differences in belief about the importance of animals and custody is going to be something that you should talk about with your partner.
Maybe the inclusion of animals in a home, or I think I talked to couples about with finances. How do you want to spend? Do you spend towards retirement, or do you spend towards travel? Do you spend towards shopping? Can you live with your partner's way of spending or not?
Yeah.
Right. Do we both value travel? Right. For me, I love traveling. We travel every quarter with our girls every year. And if I didn't have a partner that loved to travel, that's a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah.
That is important to who I am and my self-care. That's one I couldn't let go of. Right. I could compromise on less often, but I couldn't let go of.
And if you do this early on, it's fun and it's exploratory of like an interview. Who are you? What do you like? What's your culture? Even if you're the same race, right? You come from a family that might have a different culture.
Yeah.
Or if you're not and you come from different backgrounds, like what does that look like and how does that play out? I think about some couples I worked with where one of the partners is very collectivist culture and the other one's very individualistic. And that plays out in finances very differently in terms of how they view whose finances are whose. And we've talked about this in
and giving to family.
Yeah. And giving to family. Whereas in a collectivist, it's like, well, this is all my family. And individualistic, like, no, I'm talking about our nuclear and we should keep it between us.
Right.
I mean, these things play out, but earlier on, it's fun. It's like, what do we want this to look like? Look at holidays too, right? Holidays are coming up.
We're in the US, we're in the midst of our holiday season. How do we navigate going to your house, your parents' house versus mine? Do we want to just spend time together? If I was with a partner who wanted every holiday to be at his parents' house, I would struggle. Right? I don't support my in-laws.
We'll just move on from that one.
Room for my family to be included.
Yeah.
And room for compromise. If my partner is rigid on, no, we do the same thing every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, you just have to go with it.
Yeah.
That would be really difficult.
And it brings up another topic. So this actually, my wife and I talk about ourselves, and has come up with several of my couples more recently, is this idea of who actually has the final say in decorating the house. Not just for holidays, but painting and color and what style of furniture, because someone ultimately has the power in that final decision.
My husband couldn't give less shits.
And it's not me. Right. But what's important is the expectation around that process. Am I included in the conversation, or no, I'm just going to do it. Like those
that
are
speaks
things.
To another thing. Like, how do we make big decisions?
Yes.
Do we believe in egalitarian collaboration, or is there a hierarchy? Or, is there a way that we both feel comfortable buying a car, buying a house, talking about those things?
Yeah. How are we going to navigate the stressful stuff? How do you process stress? Understanding that about your partner is really important. But the decision-making, it's funny because these couples will, well, how do you make that? I just, and they put their head towards the other partner, right? They lean over, and I just let them make that decision because like they're happier. And somebody like that speaks to another thing: is somebody need more control? Are you okay with that? It's really about, unless there's like abuse or something, it's not about right or wrong. It's what are you willing to be okay with? And a lot of times we just unconsciously navigate into these systems that are very similar to our family of origin dynamics without knowing, like we've talked about in previous episodes. And it's like, is that what you want? Is that okay?
Patriarchal home, a matriarchal home, or an egalitarian home.
Yeah.
Do you guys agree on what that looks like? Right? If we get married and my husband says, okay, now I expect you to not work and stay home with the kids, I would go nuts. Would absolutely go nuts. And it wouldn't be good for our kids either. Right? That was a non-negotiable for me. I know for my mental health, I can't just do that.
Yeah.
For other women, it's a non-negotiable, or men, that they do stay home. How do you guys navigate that? How do you talk about that so that both partners feel like they get some autonomy, but we're working as a team to do that?
Yeah. And I think this goes back to speaking to values. There's values that guide that need. And that's another thing, again, going back, is that an emotional need that we need to do these things? Or is it really truly value? I value being a productive member of society, and it looks like this for me. Or productive member of society looks like being a very good mother that stays at home, which is a very important role that unfortunately our society does not look at in a monetary sense. So,
or health. I deeply value health and my partner doesn't. If I value having a sober and dry home and my partner likes to drink or smoke cigarettes, how does that work for me? Can I tolerate that behavior?
Yeah.
If not, this belief of like, oh, but I love them and it'll all work itself out. No, it's just clouding the judgment that in a few years, you're going to have to reconcile whether you like it or not.
And there's never not going to be red flags.
Of course.
So
no one's perfect.
This is really a conversation of what are the red flags I'm willing to put up with? And they revolve around finances. How do we deal with that? Am I okay with my partner handling it? Am I okay with everything being put on me? What are our expectations around the house in terms of chores? And these things, of course, might change. I think about contexts where couples where one's working and one isn't. So they naturally like, well, hey, since if you're at home, do you mind taking a little bit more on at this realm? Then that partner starts working. That might change. That's okay. But looking forward of what that might look like based on what's happening now in your relationship is really, really important. It can save you many years of investment
and pain. Think about, we often, and you said at the top of this, hear couples say, but we've invested 12 years. You don't want to be that person that's invested 12 years and saying, oh shit, why didn't we talk about, how did I not know that this was part of them? Their behaviors, their behaviors that are going to come up that are going to piss you off along the way. That's separate. I'm talking about the things that to my core are not going to change or going to be difficult to change. Right. And talking about those now when we're young in the relationship, not once that oxytocin has kind of cemented us as a partnership.
And a couple of things come up for me, and I probably won't remember both, but the first one is that talking about it is also helpful because it sets expectations. So now we actually know and we know the needs and we make those needs clear. So we can set each other up for success. If you learn a little bit more about your partner needs to do, like they want more control over decisions around the house and you're okay with that, then you can set that and meet that need off the bat. That can help. And I did lose the second one. Wonderful.
You're human, Greg.
Oh my gosh.
It'll hit you. So at the core of this, let's talk about some tips of how to talk about it, when to talk about it.
Oh, I know what I'm going to say.
What you got?
So what we've been talking about right now is very content-based in terms of things to talk about. And people might say what they think because that's what they think is the right thing to say. But there's also a period that you need to give it time to watch the behaviors too.
Ooh, fair point.
And first impressions can last anywhere from 2 to 4 years.
That's what happened.
And that's because it takes a certain amount of time or a certain amount of experiences to start seeing who this person is in different contexts. Oh, they treated that server like shit.
Trauma,
somebody tells you
fear,
that stuff.
sadness.
Yeah. Like, how are they managing that stuff? We need to watch it. So we need to talk about it, and we also need to observe it.
Mhm.
That kind of really gives you a better idea of what this is going to look like. Granted, anything can change, but we're trying to do our best to understand if
Mhm.
this is the best thing for us.
So keeping an eye on that. I encourage people to journal about it too, because it helps us keep ourselves grounded in terms of, here are my non-negotiables. Revisit those every once in a
Mhm.
while. Are these still being met? Is that still realistic for my partner? As a couple partnership, every month, having a sit down of, how are we doing in terms of values? How are we doing in terms of connection? Really touching base with one another, because you will evolve and grow as people inside and outside of the partnership, but touching base along the way so you can catch any blips that come up.
Mhm.
One, before you're 12 years down the line and regret it, but two, before it becomes a bigger issue.
And along with all the content we've talked about in terms of topics, I would say probably more important than any of that and any of those topics is learning how to communicate better so you can talk about those safely.
Yeah.
So, a lot of premarital counseling out there, they do a lot of topic stuff, and they teach you what topics to talk about, but they don't necessarily teach you how to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
And it really doesn't serve a function if I know to talk about finances, but my husband won't even talk to me about it and they shut down,
Mm-hmm.
or what have you. So knowing how to talk about it, learning the communication skills if you're deciding to invest long term, of how we can be more effective with each other when these stressful things come up. I would say that's probably the number one thing I work on with couples is we need to establish a process by which you can navigate these topics, because stress is going to enter the life and our relationships at any point. It's about how you can get through the shit together. And that is, how do we communicate and navigate and process stress dyadically or as a couple?
And if you don't have the tools, because you might not, right? They're learned or acquired
Mm-hmm.
tools. Go to a couples therapist, take some classes, do the things you need to do to equip yourself, rather than just saying, well, I tried and now we can't talk about it. Because that won't serve you either,
Mm-hmm.
which is tough.
Yeah. Oh, that brings up the topic of attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Learn your partner's attachment. And if
Mm-hmm.
you know more about the attachment, you know how they're going to respond in conflict. Are they going to avoid, right? Or is there an anxious attachment? They're going to worry if you're not home by a certain time. Like, what does that look like? What does that attachment insecurity look like?
There are quizzes to assess for that online. We've had a podcast episode on this.
Yep.
It can underline any interaction or reaction we have with other people,
Mm-hmm.
not just our partner.
Yeah, I think about attachment as our filter by which we perceive and understand our dynamics with others. And that includes in our relationship. So, say I'm anxiously attached. I might see my partner being quiet as I did something wrong, or they might leave me. That serves as a lens, and really understanding that can help understand why maybe ourselves and our partners can make the decisions or have the reactions that they do in certain contexts. And are you willing to kind of deal with that long term?
What other tools or suggestions do you have for premarital couples as they go into this stage, or couples that are about to cohabitate or what have you?
So the communication one's a big one. Whether you take a course for that, you read on it, I think that takes so much. The other is really making a commitment to yourselves to prioritize your relationship on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
Play, which is, you brought that up before. I don't know if you want to talk more about the play and what that looks like.
Having hobbies together, trying new things. We need to laugh with our partner. That positive sentiment we build with one another is crucial, because if I see them as a positive person, as someone I enjoy, the dishes left in the sink piss me off a whole lot less than if I'm chronically angry at them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So play is a big one. Making sure that even when we move in, even if we have a child, our relationship still remains a distinct priority that we focus on every week.
Yeah. And as you said, it builds that positive sentiment. We can give our partner the benefit of the doubt when they are leaving their dishes around all the time or something. Mm-hmm. And just in general, it shakes things up to where it's not always about what's not happening in our relationship. And it puts more of an effort in, let's make things happen and enjoy our time together. Because when you get in a relationship, that honeymoon phase dissipates. And it's because more stressors come in there. You get in routines and jobs, and the relationship is often, as John Gottman says, the first sacrifice in these things. And so the goal is to make a commitment to yourself to do what you can to continue to have fun, to continue to date each other.
as a premarital couple, the sooner you can get in the habit of these things, the sooner you can have these hard conversations about values and are we actually good partners for each other, the better. I hear people often say like they fear having it too early because they're going to scare the other person away. Okay, maybe not date one, but within a few dates, it's okay to start talking about some of these harder hitting issues. And actually, I think it's helpful because then you're not emotionally bonded to them. You're not invested in the same way. And to be honest, they're grown-up questions that is okay to ask.
One tactic that I've worked with some people on in the dating world is that maybe the conversation starts around asking what that person thinks about other people who engage in X. So it's not personal. It's like,
oh, interesting.
So, hey, what do you think? Like if I were in front of somebody I'm dating and I'm just meeting them, I'm like, so what do you think about people like couples that where the one partner is in control of everything, like finances, or to kind of get their idea? Because maybe they don't want to answer about themselves, but you can get an idea based on how they feel about others about it. So there's tips and tricks.
So you say that on date one, Greg?
Oh yeah. I'm going in of like, are you, well, actually
are you a serial killer?
So actually date one with my wife was, are you want to get out of Tallahassee, Florida?
Okay, that's a crucial question. No offense to anyone who lives there, but that's a crucial question.
I was like, because if you don't, this is not going anywhere.
A non-starter.
But that was very personal to me, right? I don't want to live here. And, there's couples that get together and some of them are like, I don't foresee myself in this location long-term. That's really important to tell your partner because they might have roots here and they see themselves very much ingrained in this culture and society. And maybe they actually do have a network already. So that one's a big one.
And I should say this. I say these questions and this encouragement from a person who's had to go through the hard road of not talking about it at the beginning. Because my husband and I started dating when we were 16. No 16-year-old is on the third date. So do you want children? Do you want that white picket fence? No, that wasn't on my radar. But in our 20s, it was. As we started having to talk about these things. Right. And not all of our stuff aligned. And so we had to work through that and still do. So I say this from a place of, trust me, you don't want to have to go through those speed bumps either.
And I see, and it's a great point, because I see people who don't have them earlier on, which is the majority of us, that they're more willing to compromise on their values because they've already invested. And that's fine if you want to do that. And it's great that you're able to see flexibility in your own values. And it may not bring kind of the happiest road.
Yeah.
And I work with couples on how do we help each other with different values, get those met in the relationship. Like that's a thing to work on. That can happen.
You couldn't pay me to go back to dating. Oh, it's a tough life experience. There's a lot of fun to it, but it's really challenging to date, to cohabitate, to be in that premarital state or even young marriage. It's really difficult. Yeah.
And I also think it's very exciting.
Yeah.
And in that excitement, we can get lost on some of the things that are important that we're talking about now that we have to work with couples down the road, because they're not necessarily the most discussed or kind of navigated earlier on. And I think one thing you can do too is just think about your family for yourself. If you're really not sure, is what were the things that your own parents and their grandparents struggled with? Oh, they don't talk about finances. That might be something that you need to explore a little more for yourself in your relationship. Or they avoided conflict.
It's true. It's true. Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where today we talked about building long-term relationships and having those hard conversations and really kind of siphoning through, are we good partners before it's too late? As always, if anyone has any questions or concerns or topic suggestions, please feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks.